Imagine taking a sledgehammer to a kitchen wall and, instead of plaster and brick, finding an opening that drops into a world of rooms, stairways, and sealed stone doors, a buried town carved from volcanic rock where sound dies quickly and your own voice seems to disappear. That image is the axis of one of the most extraordinary accidental discoveries of the 20th century, a home renovation, a startled contractor, and a passage that led into a city beneath the earth. They called it Derinkuyu. Reported accounts describe an underground complex that reaches roughly 85 meters deep, organized in as many as 18 levels, with capacity estimates given by local testimony and early explorers of thousands, even up to 20,000 people. Those numbers are described as reported. The details still echo with uncertainty. What remains clear is this: behind ordinary walls in Cappadocia lay architecture designed to keep people alive, silent, and hidden. And for reasons both practical and human, once people took shelter below, many never returned. The moment of discovery is almost cinematic. It was 1963 when a homeowner renovating a modest dwelling in central Cappadocia removed a wall and found hollow space behind it. A construction worker struck plaster and then stone, revealing not merely a crawl space, but a carved stair disappearing into the dark. What followed was amazement and confusion, the discovery that beneath a modern house stretched an ordered subterranean settlement. That human image, a hand on a chisel, a light swung into a stairwell, faces peering into a corridor whose end could not be seen, is how these places re-entered modern life. If you love history's odd, quiet revelations, hit subscribe to follow more excavation stories like this. The story of why such cities exist begins with the ground itself. Cappadocia's landscape is made of tuff, a rock formed from volcanic ash that once lay soft and workable. For communities over millennia, that softness was an invitation. You could cut rooms, passageways, and cisterns with simple tools. Once exposed to air, the same material hardens and preserves the carved voids. That unique combination, easily carved when fresh, durable once cut, made large subterranean construction possible here in a way it would not be elsewhere. The geology turned an otherwise hostile, eroding plateau into a material you could sculpt into entire neighborhoods. Carving was only the start. Over generations, people shaped this geology into systems that allowed communities to live below ground, sometimes for extended periods. Large halls for animals and grain sat beside narrow sleeping chambers. Ventilation shafts were sunk like chimneys, bringing air down through the layers to reach rooms hundreds of feet below. Water cisterns collected and held rain, and channels guided it between levels. Massive circular stone doors, wheels of rock that could be rolled into grooves to seal a corridor, functioned as gates. Traps and narrow passages could slow or turn attackers. Churches were carved with frescoed apses. Hidden chapels and assembly rooms speak to communal worship beneath the surface. Together, these elements created settlements that were not mere caves, but engineered, functional towns. The built history of these underground complexes is a palimpsest, marks from different eras layered within the same carved walls. While the full sequence remains open to interpretation, archaeologists point to long-term reuse and modification. Some features may trace to very early Anatolian cultures, perhaps linked to Hittite-era activity in the region. Later phases show adaptation by Phrygian, Persian, Greek, Roman, and Byzantine hands. In particular, the Byzantine period appears to have been a time of significant expansion. Communities facing repeated incursions and religious persecution adapted subterranean life into a deliberate strategy of survival. Over centuries, the same network of tunnels was enlarged, sealed, and repurposed. A passage cut in one era might be blocked in the next, a stable converted into a chapel, a storage room into living quarters. These layers are not abstract. They speak to how entire communities lived and organized daily life below ground. Imagine corridors lit by oil lamps, the steady work of grinding grain in stone querns, kitchens arranged around hearths whose smoke found its way up long ventilation shafts. Stables housed animals that were essential to farming and transport above ground, while stores of grain and preserves were kept cool and dry below. Schools and places of learning could exist in these chambers. Some subterranean churches featured deliberately simple iconography, designed for clandestine worship. The engineering also includes systems to manage air and water, shafts that act as lungs for the city, cisterns that gather and filter water, and drains that prevent flooding.
Tunnels could link one underground settlement to another across surprising distances. Derinkuyu and Kaimakli are often cited as part of a broader network, with passages and galleries connecting complex neighbors. All of this raises the central question that the title poses so succinctly. Why did so many people not return? Why did underground life, at least in many cases, become more than temporary refuge and turn into a form of permanence? One set of reasons is practical and defensive. The stone doors, the narrowing passageways, and concealed entrances were designed to be hard to reopen in haste. Rolling a circular stone into its groove could effectively seal a corridor from the outside. In the context of raids or conquest, sealing an entrance saved lives. In some accounts, families chose to seal their openings deliberately and remain below until danger passed.
But sometimes the sealing was meant to be long-term, to protect those inside from detection at any cost. When centuries of conflict were the norm, the calculus favored invisibility. Runaway logistics compounded that choice. Emerging from a hidden compound could be lethal if occupying forces still controlled the surrounding landscape. During sieges or waves of rounds of violence, the surface was where danger waited. The practicalities of survival, food stocks, air, water systems, meant that small groups or entire kin networks could subsist for extended periods without surfacing. Over generations, children were born underground and learned only the rhythms of the subterranean world. For them, the surface was a story rather than a daily reality. That social continuity created a form of permanence. Leaving would have meant abandoning not only shelter, but also the extended social infrastructure, neighbors, trades, and faith communities that sustained life below. Other reasons are environmental and accidental. Over time, entrances could be buried by landslides, collapsed by earthquakes, or sealed by deliberate landscaping as houses and fields were reconfigured above. When an entrance is lost to geology, a community can become effectively sealed from the world above for decades or centuries. Remember that generations can pass between major surface events. A lane becomes farmland, then pasture, then centuries of memory evaporate. In many reported cases, what was once an obvious opening grew obscure with time. That process of accidental forgetting is compounded when the people above change. Different language, religion, or political allegiance, and the memory of subterranean shelters loses social traction. There is a psychological dimension as well. Living underground reshapes perceptions of safety, identity, and what counts as home. After prolonged confinement, the world below can acquire its own economy, priesthood, and customs. Emerging to face uncertain and possibly hostile rulers could mean losing the relative security achieved through concealment. For those who had already lived long stretches below ground, the cost of reintegration could be prohibitively high: exposure to disease, losing land rights, or being subject to violent reprisals. In short, choice and coercion, convenience and fear, all work together to keep some people where they were. This is not only interpretation. Survivors' accounts and local oral histories speak of families that lived multiple generations underground. The spaces were conceived to be self-sustaining. Stores, stables, water systems, and defensive measures were not afterthoughts, but core design choices. These are the same features that make the question of return so complicated. A sealed door could be a life-saving measure in the short term and a permanent barrier in the long term. Rediscovery in the modern era has its own stories of near misses and fortunate accidents.
After Derinkuyu's 1963 revelation, other sites were brought into the light by happenstance and perseverance. A local farmer named Latif Akar is often cited in accounts as having found another complex, appearing in some sources as Ozkan or Osjuna, a possible transcription variant. There are stories from the 1970s of a collapse nearly revealing tunnels, only to be covered again by workers who did not investigate further. More recently, reported finds in 2024 near a place rendered in some sources as Matiyat, another name with uncertain transcription, added fresh layers to this patchwork of rediscovery. These episodes underline how fragile the chain between underground and surface can be. Sometimes a ladle of dirt, a renovation, or a sinkhole is all that stands between oblivion and revelation. At the same time, human curiosity and opportunism have caused damage. Tomb robbers and looters have entered chambers illegally, removing artifacts and destroying contextual information that archaeologists rely on to understand how these spaces were used and by whom. Objects taken to private collections or smuggled abroad strip sites of their ability to speak through material culture. The destructive consequence is twofold: the loss of cultural patrimony for local communities and the loss of scientific evidence. Early explorers sometimes entered without conservation protocols. That, combined with later plundering, means parts of these underground cities are already irretrievably altered. It is also worth noting that only a fraction of many of these complexes has been formally explored and recorded. Some sites have perhaps a quarter of their passageways investigated, while large stretches remain sealed or collapsed. The result is a landscape of partial knowledge, breathtaking remains that still contain rooms we may never see, and systems we can only guess at. The silence of unexcavated chambers reinforces the title's image, the cave that makes no echo, because parts of its interior remain mute, unprobed by light. Unsurprisingly, the dramatic nature of underground cities has attracted alternative narratives. Fringe theories circulate, claims that these complexes predate known civilizations by many thousands of years, or that they were constructed by non-human agents. Such ideas gain traction in part because the visible evidence is striking, and because large swaths have not been excavated. But mainstream archaeology offers a different account grounded in stratigraphy, material culture, and comparative analysis. The weight of evidence supports construction and adaptation by human communities across successive historical periods, with specific additions and modifications traceable to known cultural phases.
While gaps in the record leave room for debate about precise dates and sequences in particular places, there is no reliable archaeological support for non-human builders or wildly ancient chronologies that would displace the long-established narrative of human agency in the region. Fringe claims are cultural phenomena, worth noting. They reveal as much about contemporary imagination as they do about the archaeology, but they do not replace the consensus formed by methodical excavation and peer-reviewed study. That consensus does, however, leave open many compelling ambiguities. Which exact features were Hittite, which later Byzantine? How extensive were the tunnel networks linking different complexes? To what extent did entire populations migrate underground for generations, and where did they go when they left? Answers are often provisional, shaded by the realities of preservation, excavation funding, and the simple fact that so much remains covered by earth. The silence at the heart of these sites is not only physical, it is historical, gaps where we would like to hear voices but cannot. The title image, "The Cave with No Echo," works on multiple levels. Literally, in many of these deep, narrow chambers, sound dampens and a shout quickly attenuates. The rock absorbs rather than projects. The architecture was designed to muffle movement and hide activity. Metaphorically, the silence points to loss. Sealed doors that blocked not only invaders but memory, artifacts removed by looters, and unexcavated rooms that have never had their stories told. It signals the human tendency to bury what is dangerous and, in the act of concealment, to mute entire chapters of life. At the same time, these underground cities are a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity. They are evidence of how ordinary materials and labor can be marshaled into resilient systems, how communities can convert geology into shelter, worship spaces, storage, and defense. They reveal a continuity of human intention. People built, they adapted, they survived. The unanswered questions, why no one ever went back in certain cases, are themselves part of the archaeological story. They point us toward mixed causes: strategic sealing for defense, accidental loss of entrances, social choices that favored concealment, environmental change, and the slow erosion of memory. Today, these sites are a living challenge for archaeologists, local stewards, and visitors. Tourism has brought attention and some conservation funds, but it also risks further wear and misinterpretation if not carefully managed. Excavation continues, often piecemeal and cautious. New finds periodically revise what we thought we knew, and every newly cleared corridor raises new ethical and practical questions about preservation, community engagement, and who gets to tell these stories.
If the cave seems not to echo, it is because so much of its voice has been muffled by time, by stone doors, and by the incomplete arc of discovery. But echoes do return, in fragments: a fresco found beneath dust, a ventilation shaft meticulously cut, the oral history of a family who never surfaced. Those fragments let us sketch the outlines of lives lived in shadow and light.